There's winners and losers of this system. I'm going to go through some of the losers first. So this chart is hourly wages divided by gold. Divided by gold,
Yeah.
right? Not a fiat system.
You can see why people say what happened in 1971 when you look at the bottom of the chart.
So here we are at the peak in July 1970. What do you think happened after that? Look at this. And guess what? What's crazy is that after 1980, after the chaos of the inflation and stagflation of the 1970s, actually, in some ways, Reagan comes in, and we have better fiscal policies, but we don't really have better monetary policies. In fact, actually, that's slowly getting worse. But for a while, from 1980 all the way until 2000, things were getting better. And this is why some people think that one of many of the problems was actually admitting China into the WTO, because this peak right here is when China joins the WTO. And look at what's happened since really the turn of the millennium. After 2001 or after 2000, look at this. It just falls off a cliff. And again, this is hourly wages divided by gold. So, gold is kind of, the answer to fiat in many respects. And so, in a relative basis, the average person in America is getting paid less than they were 25 years ago. So, hourly wages divided by gold has plummeted since we left the gold standard, which is not a shock at all when you consider, again, that we're now in a fiat system.
Well, it's also to understand that gold is not some fixed price throughout time and space. It's
but you can't print it.
No, you can't print it. And that's supposed to be one of the features of a sound currency, is that it's divisible, but it's also scarce. Like you can't just make more of it whenever you feel like it. But the price of gold, part of the reason why the price of gold has gone up so much, at the same time that real wages has dropped, is because, again, if you know what you're doing and you have the money and you see inflation going up, you get it into assets which are more inflation proof or which benefit as a result of inflationary monetary policy. And it turns out certain precious metals fit the bill for that.
So if you're keeping score of winners and losers here, since, Triffin was proven right, since Roof was proven right, since the gold standard blew up, the average hourly wage earner in the United States has categorically been a loser. That's one thing. Here's another loser. This is personal income per capita divided by M2 money supply.
Explain M2 money supply.
M2 money supply is one of several metrics to describe how much money is in circulation. And by the way, this constantly goes up. It doesn't come when it goes down. That's what we call massive recessions. That's like 2008. That's 2020, and then we pumped it again. It went back up. So M2 almost always just goes up, almost in a straight line. When it dips, that's what we call recessions. And there's a lot of things that go into M2. It's different from M1. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty details of that, but basically M2 implies how much money is floating out there. And so personal income per capita, so this adjusts for population growth, divided by the money supply. And it's just been falling off a cliff. Really since Bretton Woods. But what's interesting is that it kind of leveled off after the 50s and then stabilized. And then look at this. Since the 80s, it dipped again, and then it rose. And really, since the turn of the millennium, it's just fallen off a cliff. And so that's another set of losers is, personal income per capita. We're talking about just normal people right now, right? Average hourly wages, personal income per capita. These are metrics that usually don't imply that you're only talking about people like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or stuff like that. These are normal people. Here's another chart. Hourly wages divided by GDP. So hourly wages the average American has just been decimated since the 60s when you divide by GDP. And the reason for it is because GDP is going up faster than hourly wages.
This is the other part too to consider here, and I think this is really important for people to understand. Is this chart has been steady. It's not as if something happened in 71 that impacts all of this. here's the other thing I want people to understand when we talk about GDP, since we brought it up a couple of times here. Gross domestic product is the total, spending. So the United States GDP is somewhere around like 30 trillion. What's important to understand is that 7 trillion of that is government spending, right? Federal government spending. We're not even talking about state or local. So it's important to understand that GDP numbers are easily manipulated through inflationary monetary policy. In fact, this is why Murray Rothbard and others try to come up with a different way to exclude public spending and only count private sector spending when it came to counting GDP, because otherwise the federal government can print $1 trillion, spend it, and be like, look at our GDP numbers. They shot up by $1 trillion. So obviously there's ways to manipulate that. Mm-hmm. So again,
that's actually why this chart's dropping, because if you were to go back to, like, say, the 1880s or 90s, we were going through a lot of economic growth in that time period, but we were firmly on the gold standard.
Yeah.
This would be relatively flatline. It would only go up if GDP was contracting, and GDP would be contracting faster than hourly wages would be contracting. That's a recession, right? Yeah. And so you see spikes here, and every time this spike, I say spike, right? Every time it slows down its rate of decline, that's actually an economic downturn. So you have one in the, this is the early 80s recession. This is the early 90s recession. This is the dot-com bubble. This is the 2008 crash, and then this is COVID. Mm-hmm. And so you see this spike because GDP is not collapsing, right? But it's dropping during these recessions.
Yeah, it's not like your wages are getting better.
It's just that GDP is dropping faster.
Yeah.
But if you were under like a gold standard type system, this would be relatively flatline, because presumably the GDP would be growing at the same rate that hourly wages would be growing, because you wouldn't have money printers being able to funnel freshly printed cash to select usually politically connected entities. The reason this is dropping consistently is because it's not that hourly wages haven't risen. They have. Mm-hmm. It's that GDP's risen substantially faster. But it's not risen faster because necessarily worker productivity's gotten better. It has gotten better. Yeah. By all metrics, the economy is better off than it was 50 years ago. We have better technology. We have a better standard of living. But on a relative basis, it's overwhelmingly the benefits and gains. Yes, everybody has benefited largely to some degree. But there's a select group of politically connected people that have vastly benefited far more than the average American. Yeah. So those are the losers. This is hourly wages divided by M2 money supply. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
The money supply is increasing substantially faster than hourly wages are. Because again, an increasingly smaller number of people, this is where the left actually has a point even if they don't realize it. An increasingly smaller number of people are gaining the vast majority of the increase in wealth. Most of it is paper though.
Yeah.
And it's not going to normal people. And so this is what's fueling what they call income inequality. So these are all the losers. Now, who are the winners in this system? Because I just showed, personal income's dropping, hourly wages are dropping compared to GDP, compared to money supply.
Bottom line is, if you are what anybody would consider to be kind of essentially middle class or poor, which is to say that you are largely dependent on your job for your income. You don't have a lot of investments. You don't have a lot of assets. Maybe you have a retirement account. Maybe you have your house. Maybe, but you need that job. If you don't have that job, you're struggling. That's who have been the losers. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the winners. This is federal debt to GDP. So hourly wages collapsing compared to GDP. Federal debt soaring to an all-time high. So the federal government's been a huge winner.
And this is
arguably the greatest winner in all of this has been the federal government.
Well, and this is something too that we have to acknowledge. You see a lot of debt increase in the 80s. And there's a lot of people that said Reagan didn't actually achieve economic, he didn't have sound economic policy. What he did was he cut taxes. So that might have been, like, from our perspective, that was sound. But then he also increased deficit spending. Now, again, you can look at that and say, yeah, there's problems with what Reagan did there. Like, let's be honest. And I'm saying this as someone that's a big fan of Reagan. The other, again, why did he do it? Okay, so part of the problem too is what were we trying to do? What were we trying to do all throughout the 80s? Bankrupt the Soviet Union.
And it worked.
And it worked. And it worked.
But now we're going bankrupt.
So now, but again, and you had this problem where Dick Cheney was famous for saying, well, Reagan proved deficits don't matter. No, they do matter. It's just that sometimes the reason why you're incurring the deficit might be worth it. But if you're making deficits a part of your permanent policy, no, they matter, Dick.
Wow. Well,
I was saying
like
Dick Cheney.
Oh, okay. It's like a chemo treatment. You're hoping that it kills the cancer faster than it kills you.
Yeah.
In other words, you're hoping that it bankrupts Russia before it bankrupts us.
The problem, and again, you really have to hand it to Reagan, because when you look at something like Star Wars, that really did put the Soviets on the brink. The problem is we created this permanent expectation that these deficits just don't matter. The government can just keep spending and running deficits, and we'll be fine. Look, we're the biggest world economy. Well,
so. Losers, average hourly wages, middle class, working class. Winners, huge winner here, federal government.
Yeah.
Huge winner. Here's another big winner. This is corporate profits divided by GDP.
Yeah.
So again, this is where the left brings up a critique that a lot of conservatives I don't think have a response to. They rail against Wall Street or corporate America, and the reason that it resonates with people is because this number is real, and people might not be economists, but they do get the sense that corporate America has benefited greatly from the last 40 years, whereas the working class has not. They just simply haven't.
Yeah.
And so the federal government has benefited greatly from this system. Corporate America has categorically benefited greatly from this system. Corporate profits as a percentage of GDP is greater than it ever has been at any point in American history. And again, that includes eras in history where we had sound money. And so again, this additional money that's being printed is going to a select number of people. Well, one of the groups is the federal government. Well, another group is corporate America. Here's another winner. This is the S&P 500 divided by GDP. So the stock market, as divided by GDP, is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
So the stock market has been a huge winner from this.
Inflationary monetary policy favors those sorts of assets.
This is exactly what we're talking about when we say the everything bubble. This is the everything bubble. This is the stock market at an all-time high at the same time that hourly wages and income per capita has collapsed, and at the same time that federal debt has gone up. And I want to keep emphasizing the federal debt thing because I'm going to get somewhere with this in a second. Here's the next thing, which is the trade-weighted U.S. dollar is also effectively almost at an all-time high. Well, that's actually not true. It was kind of at an all-time high right before the Plaza Accord in the 1980s. This doesn't go as far back, but certainly since 2008, it's at like a 15-year high. What's interesting is that this should not be the case when you consider that this is our budget deficit.
Yeah.
We're running a $1.83 trillion budget deficit. That's like a 6% debt to GDP. And this goes back to the 1930s.
Yeah.
So we had you know what this dip is? World War II.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, if you really want to get mad, if you really want to get mad, look at budget deficits during World War II and then compare them with.
So we're flat here. This is the Depression though.
Yeah.
Right? FDR's in charge and he's spending money hand over fist on, every alphabet soup government agency you can think of. And look, we're running a negative $14 billion deficit in 1937. Yeah. And then look, we fall off a cliff in World War II because we're fighting the Nazis and the Japanese and the Italians, except the Italians don't really put up a fight. Yeah. And we're running a $51 billion budget deficit. But then, after the war, we come back to even. And the grand scheme of things, like you can go back and look, we're basically flat if you go far enough back here.
Yeah.
And then, you see this drop again. This little blip is World War II. Yeah. And look at where we are right now.
Yeah.
This is COVID.
Yeah.
This is us trying to get out of COVID.
Yeah.
Like you see how we're bending.
Yeah.
This is literally the slippery slope is what this is.
Do you think we've seen the full weight of the results of shutting every freaking business down during COVID? Like what we
we currently are.
Like, do you think we have realized the full damage
we've
that was
accelerated
done yet?
the slope is what's happened. So there's two more charts I want to briefly show you. So the next one is this is a federal budget or surplus, right? And again, goes back, and you see here it just falls off a cliff.
Yeah,
and
that one period in the 90s.
Look at it. It's so bad. I have to scroll down for the viewers. This is again $1.8 trillion deficit. Now here's the trade balance. This is our trade balance, right? Positive or negative trade balance. And this goes back to I believe 1992. And look at this. This also falls off a cliff. And this is Liberation Day. This is right before Liberation Day, when we were running a $138 billion monthly trade deficit.
Yeah.
All-time historic low. And then this is Trump's tariffs trying to pull us back from that, and he got us halfway. So this right here, the dollar should not be climbing when we're running a twin deficit.
Except for
like in no country in history can be running a 6% debt to GDP in peacetime with no recession and a $1 trillion trade deficit and have their currency rise in value.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that we're the reserve currency of the world.
Yes.
That's the only reason.
Because everyone else had to print their currency in order to get our currency in order to engage in certain elements of international trade.
And this is, by the way, something that conservatives who criticize Trump's trade policy should actually understand, is that if your country's running a massive trade deficit for a substantial period of time, the market forces will eventually force a correction of your currency to devalue your currency. I'm not saying the government. I'm saying the market will eventually devalue your currency to deal with the trade deficit and make imports more expensive, because you're buying more than you're spending more than you're bringing in. Think about it from this standpoint as an individual. If I am spending $100,000 a year, but I'm only bringing in $50,000 a year, well, there will be a correction eventually. Either I will bring in more revenue, or I will go bankrupt and nobody will loan me money, and I won't be able to buy $100,000 worth of goods a year. The same thing applies with countries in terms of international trading. I'm not saying governments meddling with things. I'm saying pure market forces would naturally drive down the value of our dollar because we're running a twin deficit. It is very rare for countries to be able to run a twin budget and trade deficit for years, decades even. Yeah. And have their currency go up in value. When we talk about the economy being broken, that's what we mean.
Well, and that's when stuff like that happens, you can look at it and be like, something is being manipulated, right? This is not a natural process that takes place in the course of voluntary exchange. There's some sort of legal manipulation that makes this possible. And this is the part where, again, when you look at this from the various perspectives, you might be able to understand why people made the decisions that they did. And now we're in a position where you're seeing, like on the right, I'm seeing more and more people say, the problem is trade, and so we're going to solve it through tariffs. Tariffs are the key to bringing back our manufacturing sector. Tariffs are the key to the wealth of a country. Okay, well, I understand why people think that. And I even understand why tariffs can be used as a proper way to achieve better trade, to achieve, the problem is that when people start to get the mindset, no, the problem is trade, right? Like that chart you showed up, it's when we let China into the WTO, that's the problem. Okay, but what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on a foreign good or service. So what have you just done when you tax a foreign good or service? You've made it more expensive for me to buy the thing I want. Now, you could argue that in and of itself does not make me wealthier. I am not wealthier because the government taxed me to buy a foreign good or service. However, if you use the tariff in such a way as to bring down or to get better trade deals, that could potentially be better for me. But that takes a step beyond the question of tariffs, right? It's the same thing with the left looking at this going, see, we told you the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. How do we solve it? Well, we solve it through a wealth tax. These people got their money by not by doing something really good. They got it by manipulating the system. Okay, but what are you offering? Well, a wealth tax, you just told me, okay, so let me get this straight. You, the politician, you, government, created a system to operate in a particular way. I'm now operating in accordance with the way that system operates. Now you're going to tax me more for doing it. What do you cause me to do? I'm going to pull out my assets and I'm going to move somewhere else. Now what happens to your economic system? You think it's bad now, right? With what you're doing? Now do it and disincentivize the people you need to keep actually the factories open and everything else. And so once again, if you're only looking at one aspect of this, well, these people are benefited from, these people are the winners in the system. The system's bad, so we're going to take money from the winners and we're going to give it to the losers. Okay, but you haven't fixed the underlying system that creates this feedback loop. Not to mention the fact that when the government takes the money in the form of taxation, that doesn't mean they equally distribute among the losers. Those politicians then spend it on their priorities. And what's their primary priority? Getting reelected.